we start talking about discrimination, we start talking about segregation, we start talking about Jim Crow, we start talking about apartheid, we start talking about police brutality. These are all symptoms of white supremacy.
The more insecure white men become, the more they feel a need to exert their superiority, their power and their force. And so the one obvious victim of white rage has always been black men.
White people actually love us. They really do. They want us here. They love us not in the sense that they respect us or want to treat us fairly, but they love us the way a master loves his dog.
And there's a big difference between being a slave and being enslaved, okay? Enslaved is mental, okay? Slave is physical.
If you look at black America and you look at black men and put them in two categories, there are those who are popular and then those who are great.
Racism is the raping of a continent, of a humanity of people, of materials and resources, and using them to enrich yourself and validating that for the rest of time.
Any black man who stands for his people, any black man who is against the white supremacist structure and is willing to stand by any means against any threats, is indeed going to be considered a terrorist.
Because as long as African people were in charge of the planet, there was harmony. There was no wars between China, Japan, the American Indians, the Caribbean. As long as we were in control, there was harmony on the planet Earth.
You know, I often say when I lecture that the African that got on that boat is not the African that got off that boat.
When you conquer a civilization, you're actually conquering their God. Because what do? You change the name of God once you change their religion, once you change their culture.
There's a bitterness and an anger towards black people for not allowing themselves to remain in slavery so white people can feel privileged.
White supremacy is the only religion that isn't a religion. However, it is the most powerful religion on the planet.
Let it play out. The end of that was Hidden Colors 4, The Religion of White Supremacy. Now, our king for 2025, what's his name? Trump? Is exactly what we just described, a white supremacist. Now, we being having still the slave mentality, the William Lynch syndrome, which Damien is going to specialize in talking about. What do you think of that item I just showed you? You youngsters, one elder, one young, well, everybody's young in heart. That's the only way you can stay sane and black. But what you see is what we're up against, a white supremacist. The problems of the world, colonialism, all these factors play into our demise. Wherever we go, the continent of Africa has been, well, I want to say effed over, but
there's a school of thought that says what we have to deal with is the fact that our children and in our families, we are often teaching and reinforcing the idea of white supremacy. Before our children ever go to school, a lot of black parents are teaching them that the white folks are superior to them, and that because of that, we are culpable for anything that we suffer. The idea of a parent raising their child at say age 2 to 4 to 5 and teaching them that black people are the original and are superior, that is something that's anathema to a lot of people in our community. They do the exact opposite.
Mm. You're the youngest among us. Damien?
Yes, sir, Mr. Gilchrist. Thank you again for having me on the show today. I had a phenomenal time.
I can't see your
week.
eyes, but you know. Can you do something about that?
I'll be more than happy to show my eyes, Mr. Gilchrist.
Make sure you're not asleep.
No,
he has the prescriptions.
Asleep. And the question is?
How do we deal with this And we've had to deal with it all our lives, white supremacy. And Donald Trump being the king of white supremacy. The religion of white supremacy. That's what we're talking about. It's a religious cult that we have to deal with. And it's the biggest challenge is coming up now. Well, let's hear from Graham. Graham, what do you got to say about that? I know you've got a lot to say about this one.
You know, the notion of race didn't come about until a couple of 100 years ago. People primarily classified themselves in clans, tribes, and nations.
Right.
Matter of fact, the Roman Empire had people of all ethnic groups in it. Asians, Africans were their generals, their governors. White people in this country are led to believe that they are the majority, but they're the abject minority of the world. And there's an ad here for a law firm, and they talk about repeating the number, and people will say it, and I'm sure you've seen it on TV. It's the same thing with everybody. If you're redundant in the speech, people will repeat what you tell them. Republican mantra in the 50s and 60s was to repeat the lie long enough and people will believe it. So the notion that white people are superior, matter of fact, in the beginning of this country, Benjamin Franklin said, God forbid that the Scots and the Saxons should get a foothold in this great white land. And that was Ben Franklin in the 1700s, when white people were by far the abject minority on this continent. So understanding the mindset, and as a man thinketh, so is he, said Jesus. He who rules the head rules the body. And I would tell people that at work, if I can outthink you, I will be able to direct you in any direction I want to go, and I'll be there waiting for you. So when I interrogated you, my questions were posed to you, not because I didn't already know the answers. I knew the answers. But I wanted you to understand that when it came down to it, you could not go against me mentally. So when that happens, you're automatically defeated. Emotionally, you're beset. And you then acquiesce to the situation at hand. We need to understand something, that because we had a black president, it doesn't mean anything really changed. NYU offered a course after Barack Obama was elected, the course. And I don't know what the tuition is at NYU, but I know it's in the tens of thousands. They had the temerity to offer a course, America in the post-racial era. Now, anybody that spent money on that stupidity needs to get their money back, because we are never going to be in a post-racial era in this country. It's not going to happen. The human dynamic will not even make way for that. So we need to understand, for instance, these people that call themselves Christian nationalists.
Right.
You can't be a Christian and be a nationalist.
That's right.
Christianity is it is not of any nation.
Right.
No nation can claim Christianity.
That's right.
It is a faith that is universal.
That's it.
So, you know, that kind of insanity needs to be confronted at all times. Language, he who controls the conversation controls the language. Look at how they took Black Lives Matter and twisted that into something else. Look at Colin Kaepernick, who took a knee for a specific purpose, and they tried to say he was taking a knee against the flag and against the military. So when you allow people to speak for you, that's what you get. And we have to be very sure and ardent in our conversations and when we're speaking to other people with regard to who and what we are. We cannot be defined by other groups of people.
One of the things that's implicit.
I want to show what I have in mind of white supremacy. Run item 2. I'm going to show you. I want everybody to see this once again. It's Jordan Neely being choked to death. I play this because people have to understand what white supremacy is doing. Because the same fella went to the Army-Navy game with the president and the vice president of the United States, President-elect. God, if we could stop him getting in there, that'd be a sheer miracle. But play that item. I want you to pay attention to what's going to happen in 2025.
This video was recorded in the Broadway Lafayette subway station in Manhattan last May 1st at 2:24 p.m. The woman filming, Yvette Rosario, has just witnessed a struggle in her subway car. The man in the white t-shirt being held on the floor is Jordan Neely. He is 30 years old, homeless, and diagnosed with schizophrenia. He boarded the train at the previous stop. Witnesses say Neely entered the car and immediately began threatening passengers, saying he was, quote, ready to die and would kill a motherfucker. Daniel Penny, a 24-year-old student and former Marine from Long Island, took Neely to the ground and put him in a chokehold. He's the blonde guy there, restraining Neely. These 6 minutes will change everything for both men. Neely will be rushed to the hospital and declared dead. Penny will go to a police precinct where his statement will kick off a legal case that's ongoing right now in Manhattan. It's one that could land him in prison for 15 years. This case divided America almost immediately. On one side, those who say Penny is a racially motivated murderer, a vigilante who thought he could put his hands on a poor black man because he was poor and black. On the other, those who believe Penny is a hero who protected his fellow riders in the face of soaring violent crime and inaction from government and police. Over the past month, I've spent day after day in a Manhattan courtroom covering the trial of Daniel Penny. I've read hundreds of pages of Jordan Neely's medical records and seen images of his autopsy. I've seen Penny's mother hold back tears on the stand as she vouched for her son's kindness. I've heard from witnesses, police, and the medical examiner. But as the trial comes to a close, basic questions still remain about exactly what happened on that subway train. It all comes back to these 6 minutes when Penny and Neely struggled on the floor of a subway car. Prosecutors say Neely's last voluntary movement was at this moment, 2:28 p.m. 51 seconds later, Penny let go of him. The medical examiner says Neely died a short time later from a chokehold, compression of his neck. What you're about to see is body cam footage from police arriving at the scene.
Now, what we just witnessed is a murder.
Yes.
And I see a black man holding him down. That infuriated me. I don't understand why 3 grown men with another human that size couldn't let him up. What is he doing? Why were they struggling with him like that? What had he done so terrible that, I mean, I don't understand this.
His poverty, his blackness offended a lot of people.
But that's not, this is New York City.
Mm-hmm.
You know, where I would think anybody in the crowd, I mean, especially if I was standing there and I saw a black man being choked by a white man, I have something to say.
We are being inured to that kind of depravity.
Now, I mean, how does that happen?
Well, they're just
Am I gay?
They're telling us it's not a human being that it's being.
But that's
choking.
how we that's how we treat each other.
Well, can I just share some point of information? Because going back to Willie Lynch, and we had a discussion about Willie Lynch on your show about 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And just to give a brief cap, Willie Lynch is an individual who came from the British West Indies, who was a slave owner. And he had a concept and a theology of how to make a slave. He actually wrote a book and a theory on how to make a slave, in which he was called to come to America from the British West Indies to present his theology. And I believe it was Jamestown, Virginia. And he came to this country as many travelers from the British West Indies. He was like I said, a slave owner, and he had an ideology on how to break a slave, make a slave. And so he came to this here United States to a convention of slave owners, and he presented his theology to these slave owners, in which this country adopted, like many other countries across the world who have engaged in slavery has adopted, which is the reason why we think the way we think, act the way we act, talk the way we talk, and do what we do here in America and all across the world. And I just want to share with you that there are a number of lynches that have been here in America that have participated in slavery. But going back to Lynch's law, because when we talk about lynching, this is something that has taken place here in America and all across the world. And just to give you a brief background on where it came from, Lynch's law, the term Lynch's law was used as early as 1782 by a prominent Virginian named Charles Lynch to describe his actions in suppressing a suspected loyalist uprising in 1780 during the American Revolutionary War. Okay, the suspects were given a summary trial at an informal court, sentences handed down including whipping, property seizure, coerced pledges of allegiance, and conscription to the military. So going back into the years of 1780, they were fearful of those uprising against America, and so therefore they used the court system as a way to keep people in line, again, by using whipping techniques, taking their property, and coercing them into pledging their allegiance to the military. Charles Lynch's actions were legitimized by the Virginia General Assembly in 1782. In 1811, Captain William Lynch claimed that the phrase Lynch's law, already famous, actually came from the 1780 compact signed by him and his neighbors. So therefore, going back to 1780, you had a man who had a compact with his neighbors to, one, legitimize taking other people's property, whipping them, hanging them, which is called lynching because it derived from Lynch's idea of how to keep a person in line. And so this compact signed by him and his neighbors in Pennsylvania County, Virginia, to uphold their own brand of law, independent of legal authority. So again, independent of legal authority. What is legal authority? The law governed, the city council, the state senate, and what have you. Okay, the obscurity of the Pennsylvania County Compact compared to the well-known actions of Charles Lynch, cast doubt in being the source of phrase according to the National American Biography. So here, going back to the 1700s, it was agreed upon neighbors amongst themselves on how to keep people in line, and then adopted in the General Assembly of Virginia, which legalized lynching. And so that technique is used as of today, going back to
1712?
1712, but I'm talking about here in New York with Anthony Baez. We want to start with Eric Gardner, but again, the chokehold started.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to say started, but the last I recall, the first chokehold I recall was the choking of Anthony Baez in the Bronx.
And he hit a police car with a basketball.
Right.
That's a crime that he committed for which he was executed. Yeah.
Using the chokehold.
Football.
So again, this technique was agreed upon amongst white men to keep people in line and adopted by the government, in which this technique is still used today.
All right. Of course, I have a rolling on Willie Lynch. So we'll run that and we come right back to you, Graham. All right? Run item 3.
All right.
And we'll be right back to you. Willie Lynch.
DeWitt Scott, Moraine Valley Community College, here again with my daily reading room, in which I do a video review or breakdown of a particular book for every single day of the academic school year. In my second video here, this is the book that I'm breaking down today is a book entitled The Willie Lynch Letter and the Making of a Slave. And this book, very small book, almost a pamphlet, like this book is written as based on what has come to infamously be known as the Willie Lynch Letter. And the Willie Lynch letter is a letter that purportedly was written by a white slave owner by the name of William Lynch. Now, this individual, William Lynch, this white male who is supposedly from the state of Virginia, he wrote a letter in the 1700s, right? And the letter that he's written, it's an actual letter with salutations and everything like that, and ending and the whole nine. But the letter is supposedly written by him to his fellow slave masters, other white men in America, particularly in the South, who owned slaves. And in the letter, what he says is that the way in which the slave masters have been going about punishing their slaves through lynchings, through beatings, through torture, and sometimes death. Willie Lynch says that these sort of acts of violence are actually bad returns on your investment in slavery. He says that if you own slaves, obviously you own property, and to sort of damage that property actually works against you financially. So what he recommends in the letter is that rather than take out physical acts of punishment on slaves, there are certain things that slave owners could do to psychologically lock slaves into slavery for essentially forever, right? And he says that some of these psychological things that you can do is sort of take the slaves and pit them against one another, or sort of divide and conquer tactic. And he says you can pit them against one another in a number of different categories, right? You can pit the old slave against the young slave, the dark-skinned slave against the light-skinned slave, the slave in the South versus the one in the North versus the one in the East and the West, the one who is on a bigger plantation versus those who are on a smaller plantation. It's just a lot of different ways in which he suggests that you play these psychological games and you make the slaves fight and bicker with one another so that you always have control as a slave master and you don't have to take this out physically. It's a very, very famous letter that has sort of circulated. One of the more controversial things that, in my understanding of researching the letter, is that while the letter does make some points that may hit home or may have some validity in certain ways, I personally have in no way found that the letter to be actually true. I don't believe the letter actually happened, that there was a person named William Lynch who wrote an actual letter in this way, but it's been used so often that people think that it's real. The letter is not real to my understanding, so it shouldn't be taken as real, but there are some good lessons to be learned. But anyone who wants to get a better understanding of Black history, slavery, and just the way this letter has played out in Black nationalist circles, I really suggest that you take a look at this book. It's called The Willie Lynch Letter and the Making of a Slave, a very infamous letter. You can Google it, it'll come right up. Check it out, see what your thoughts are about it. Here it is, Willie Lynch Letter and the Making of a Slave.
Now, why do I play this stuff? I'm trying to educate us as a people of what we're going through. Now, this Willie Lynch syndrome, which has lasted all those hundreds of years, is an actual reality. Now, if you know the way we've dealt with each other over the years, it's always been the light dark. It's always been old against the young. And it's always been, I got more than what you got. Jealousy and greed are the problems that we all suffer from. And this comes from capitalism, from white supremacy, and it's how they see us. They don't see us as an equal. We are property. We are people to be used and utilized throughout history. And we don't see them like they see us. And there has to be that. Now, I'm old enough to remember segregation. And I'm the same age as Emmett Till. So I didn't understand how Emmett Till got in such a problem showing, what problem he had is showing integration in the North. And that's what these guys killed him for, because he showed them pictures of him with white students, classmates. He had pictures of him with white women, white girls, white kids in class. And I happened to be 14 at the same time, and I went to George Washington High School, and my school was half black, half white. So I didn't understand. I mean, at 14, I didn't understand. What's the problem with these people? I thought this was out of space talk. But when you look at the way they tortured and beat him, the famous picture of Emmett Till in the center center of Jet Magazine, I mean, I should have a video to run for you for that. And I'll do that next week. But people have to understand what the history of this country. And really, I mean, if you didn't live it and you just read about it, you don't get the feel. You don't get the...
But see, we have to explain and we have to educate, because we can use this as a moment to vent and express our feelings, but we really need to make good use of this time and educate the masses on the making of America. America is still a very young nation.
Mm-hmm.
As much as people would like to think about it, you got to understand America is a nation that has formed, that was formed, how can I say?
It's an adolescent nation compared to the kingdoms of Cheops, the kingdoms of Africa.
Right.
America is a baby nation.
Right.
We've been around for tens of thousands of
But
years.
we don't know our African history.
That's what's critical.
America,
we don't know.
But it's not only necessary that we know African history or where we come from and the diaspora in which we come from, but we need to know American history and how this country was founded. This is an industrialist nation, unlike many of the countries that our ancestors come from. So what we need to do is to educate the masses on the making of America and how this is a capitalist society and an industrialist society. Mm-hmm. And so if we have a better understanding of how this country was made, how it operates, how it works, we would have a better understanding of how to take it into the future.
I mean, that's subjective. I mean, you stand outside yourself and you look in. Actually, you know, I was around people who were actual slaves.
I think.
Right.
I mean, you have to be in the mix to see how it was to look at a fountain that says colored only. I went to the South in 1960, and I looked at it and I thought it was a joke. And I didn't understand the history of it all. And that was 1960.
Right.
Graham?
You know, Willie Lynch came from Barbados.
Yeah.
He was not American.
Right.
Barbados is the island where England wound up shipping most of their blacks and educated blacks and the black artisans when they sought to whiten up the British Isles. All right, there were black people in the British Isles before Jesus Christ was born. They started shipping them out, not as slaves. These were stonemasons, carpenters,
right,
physicians, attorneys, all kinds of people. That's why even to this day, Barbados has the highest literacy rate of any island in the Caribbean.
People understand
of any
black
island.
history.
Now, we need to understand, again, we have to connect the dots and we have to study the history. When you read Willie Lynch, he talks about pitting one against the other in all areas. We need to understand that it is used today in different ways. Pro sports is Willie Lynch. The slave, he talked about the treatment of the slave. He said, in pro sports, you have what's called the draft, and that is analogous to putting the slave on the block and bidding on that slave.
Like the gladiators.
Because when you are picked up, when you're picked up by that white man, he now sends you to a farm team. And that's where the slaves work, on a farm. And you work in the field for this white man in this sports enterprise. And the white man who sat in a big house on the hill sits in a skybox in the stadium. When Colin Kaepernick took the knee and they distorted everything about that action, again, he lost control of what he was doing because they tried to redefine what he was doing. But all of the quote unquote members of the plantation should have dropped their tools and stood there to support this brother. And they did not. They supported the white man. You had one owner said, oh, now we're going to have the inmates taking over the prison? Is that what it is? That was said. These guys didn't have enough common sense to wake up in that moment.
Right.
But our kids want to be ball players and all this stuff, perpetuating the psychology of Willie Lynch. It's not about being a slave today. It's about the mind, the thinking of our people. And that is what you are a slave as long as your mind is bound.
Right.
What I think a lot of people don't realize is a lot of parents are doing exactly what you have Graham talk about. Our parents are teaching our children the ways of being subject to racism. Our parents are not often enough teaching our children how to subvert, how to overcome, how to battle racism. And that's something that we cannot depend upon people outside our community to teach and strengthen our children. We bear culpability for that. And we are not doing a good enough job of teaching our children who they are, what our obligations to each other are. There was a book some years ago, The Psychopathology of Racism. And critical and central in there is the fact that if racism is seen as something not so bad, then we can go ahead and pass it on to our children. If we recognize it as being destructive of our culture and our children, then we realize we have to fortify our children and teach them how to defeat it, because people outside our community will not teach our children how to defeat racism.
Right.
Well,
that's so right. Thank you for that.
You know what?
In this discussion, you made a statement. The parents have to educate. You cannot give what you don't have. You can't teach what you don't know.
That's it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
this is where we are. We're not in the back of the bus. We're at the bus stop waiting for a bus that no longer runs on that street.
Right.
That's where we are.
That's right.
And we have to get our heads in Hakeem Adhabute's book, Black Men. He said, with regard to the profile of a black man, he said he's a brother to brothers, a brother to sisters, a protector of the black wheat, one who prefers study to nightlife.
Amen,
Study.
amen.
Our people are caught up in so much BS and diversionary tactics. We want the easy road. We don't want to apply ourselves. There's a young lady, 17 years old, this year, who received her PhD at the University of Arizona, 17 years old. You don't hear about black students performing at that level. You hear about gangbangers. You hear about basketball players. You hear about football players. All that tomfoolery. But the people that we need to start training our kids to move towards the various. We need them in law, we need them in science, because medicine is not universal. What's good for white people in their research is not necessarily good for black people. And we need to understand that. Harriet Washington wrote a book called Medical Apartheid 20 years ago on this. And she's written 5 more books, and she lives in the Bronx. She's a New Yorker.
These
talking
people
about
need
the
to be lifted
dangers
up.
of medicine and how they impact the lives of black people. I don't need to know the freaking batting average of any ball player. I don't care how many points they scored. I don't care. It's not important. Those things people are caught up in all the distractions, listening to music, smoking what they think is marijuana, and it's not marijuana. Marijuana used to grow in Brooklyn where I was growing up. Marijuana grew by the city block. And what these young people are smoking is some rot gut stuff. And give it 5 years, and you're going to see these young people coming down with physical, medical conditions, and they will be the guinea pigs for these white people out here. I was talking to a young couple. They said, "Oh, this is good marijuana." I said, "You're not smoking marijuana. You're not old enough to tell me what marijuana is."
Marijuana can cure cancer. I can prove it.
That's been said often enough.
It's all according to what you do with it and how you grow it.
THC has
everything can be
beneficial. Says they want to give you this, and we're acting like flies eating the crap
grow your
that
own
the government
pot.
is giving.
Grow your own.
Grow your own. You're better off.
That's
if you
right.
want it, grow your own.
And
I have no time for that stuff.
It's all according to what you I had great experiences with pot. They had this yellow one that came from California, Acapulco Gold.
Well,
and you take
that's a brand name.
And this is actual reality. I mean, I actually experienced
on the
it.
street corner. They'll sell it to you.
It's in the 60s, the days of the hippie.
They'll sell it on the corner.
And they had this Acapulco Gold. You take a couple of pokes and you giggle all day. I mean, I was young anyway, but I mean, it was fun. I mean, it was real fun.
They can give you yellow water and get the same results, but that has to do psychologically.
No,
if they convince you yellow water will have that effect on you, it will.
I'm telling
if you
you.
believe it.
Thank you.
No, both of you are wrong.
Once again, the mind.
Both of you are wrong. This is personal experience. I'm not talking about theory. That's actually something I did, and I know is true. Just like I know God is real.
You don't need a drug to be happy. You need to learn to experience life in its fullness without the influence of something that is not.
Preach that and follow it, and you see how many people go along with you. You're one individual preaching something
But
that
there
people
are metaphysical
disagree with.
realities, that we have to be aware of.
If we're going to teach, we teach people to think for themselves.
Well, if we can teach our
All right?
children to think for themselves, then that will
But
be
you have
counteracting the nonsense of Willie Lynch.
Yeah. Well, you have brainwashing, and we're all brainwashed. Look what happened with this presidential race. Now, why didn't we win? The righteous, one preaching love and energy. But this buffoon, Donald Trump, a white supremacist with lots of money, Elon Musk, 200 billion before Trump won, 400 billion after he won. I mean, this is a con. And the world's going to wake up to it eventually. Hopefully, we just keep the truth out here. And what we're talking about now is the problems that we're having.
Who's going to wake up our children to reality?
There's nothing wrong with football and basketball. No, you can't tell that to
It is
people
not
that
the
are.
focus of life.
Well,
it shouldn't be.
I ran track. I was in sports.
I mean, you
ran
can play football and basketball
that was
and
not that
read
important.
books.
Because you can't run track and you can't play football most of your life, but you can sure as hell pick up a damn
Well, why
book
can't you-
and learn something.
why
and
can't you
apply
do
it to
both?
your children and your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren.
Our children
Because
should be doing
everybody
both.
doesn't need to play basketball and football.
They should take care of body and mind.
Football is a mind game.
You know how to read.
It's not only a physical, but it's a mind game.
It's not a game.
If our
It's
children
not a
are
game.
taught
Because the way
properly,
you think determines the way that you act. But
Well-
we're going to sit here and complain about Donald Trump. He's not the problem. The problem is the people that voted for him.
That's
And
right.
understand where you are. You're in the United States of America. That's where you are. Ain't nothing changed but the date on the calendar.
But why do we lose?
That's what it is.
Our
That's
children-
where we
lose?
are.
our children have to be strong enough to ask
had the
auntie,
Ngawas.
ask their cousins, who did you vote for and why? If our children can be strong enough to ask that question of some of the adults in their life, then we're moving in the right direction. Most of our children are not given the strength, are not empowered to ask those kinds of questions, because in school, if you ask the wrong question, you get punished, you get thrown out of class. In the homes, the children should be allowed to ask that question. Grandpa, did you vote for Mr. Trump? Why'd you vote for Mr. If this is what is critical. What we do in our homes is what strengthens our community. What happens in the university, what happens in the street is to the detriment of our families.
Yeah.
And that's something that if we recognize that, we will strengthen and empower our children before they walk out the door on day one.
Hey, greed got Trump into the presidency. Greed and selfishness.
For some people, yeah.
That's a human trait. So
For
it
some
has
people.
nothing to do with color.
Yeah,
So the greed and the selfish.
Well, he can bribe black people just as well as he can bribe Germans or
did.
Asian people.
He did.
We agree on that.
Look.
But how do we
I mean, I'm
counteract
trying
that?
to make black people understand why we're losing. Because we're not aware of our true potential. We are the spiritual people of the planet. We made this country. Who do you think built this land? And what did we benefit? We benefit by educating your mind. Just like Graham says, pick up a book. Even if you play football, I don't see any reason why you can't read. If you play baseball, there's no reason why you can't read. So, I mean, that's the combination of the two makes
Strengthening your body is a wonderful
whole
thing.
human being.
But that should not be to the neglect of strengthening your mind.
But you
Yeah,
play
and
football to
ideally,
make money.
athletics and sports are to strengthen your body. That's the ideal. And
Well,
that
you
can be a
make
wonderful
money.
thing.
How about making money?
I said nothing about money. Ideally, sports and athletics are about strengthening your body. Once we can strengthen our body and our minds, then we're on the right track. But we can't neglect our minds because we're strengthening our
Why
body.
can't they go simultaneously?
Well, that's the ideal. And parents have, a lot of parents don't understand that they have to pay as much attention to strengthening the minds of their 2-month-old or their 20-year-old children as they do pay attention to strengthening the bodies of
Well,
their
you
2-year-old.
watch football and you don't see any dummies out there.
I do. Especially if they
don't.
leave the football field
You can't
and
be
they
a
go and
dummy
they're
and
all
play
coked up in a
football.
hotel room.
You
down
cannot
the-
be a dummy
No.
and play football.
Well, we disagree on
You
that.
play football?
We disagree for a minute. We disagree on that. Because there are people who play football who are doing some disastrous things to themselves and to our community.
Yeah.
So
professional ball is a different story in anything. Well, let me take us back
Guys will
to
do anything. They'll risk having brain damage just to play, just to prove to this white man that they're good. All right. You had NBA players. I did some work with the NBA years ago. These guys had jerseys being sold with their names on them. People went to the NBA store. They're buying Jordan, whoever's name is on the jersey. They're paying $60, $70, $80 for a jersey. You know, those ball players didn't get a dime of that.
Right.
The franchise owner was selling jerseys with your name on it, and you didn't get a dime because you was stupid. That's what was going on.
Gladiators.
They were selling product with their names on it, and they got nothing out of it. Then you have the NCAA, guys are playing ball, they're telling them, well, you can't get money, you got to play. They're bringing billions of dollars into these universities, but they can't get paid. The coaches are making $8, $9 million a year. And then you have kids getting damaged, spinal injuries, can't play anymore. What are you going to do with a broken up body and a brain that's useless?
Well,
at least you can sit, if you're in a wheelchair and you've developed your brain, you can still work and earn a living for yourself instead of waiting for Social Security disability checks.
In that case, that's where we get equality, because it happens to whites too. But let me run something one item, was it 4? This is Martin Luther King. I want people to pay attention to a Christ-like figure, which I think we should, pay attention to what his preaching was. You don't judge a person you judge a person by the content of his character and not by the color of his skin. And that goes for black people in particular.
That's the development of morality, which is a mental and a metaphysical state of mind. As you develop that, it's not something that you pick up out of a book automatically. And this, again, is where I underline the role of parents. Because a lot of parents give absolutely no thought to developing the morality, developing their children to have the right thinking and the right balance between actions and thoughts.
That's why I mentioned this statement. Exactly.
It is problematic.
Teaching morality.
It is problematic.
Teaching that, you can be biased yourself. I mean, being black, you can't hate all white people.
I'm not talking about hate. I'm talking about strengthening your character.
Trump is preaching hate.
Yes, he is.
And he's a white supremacist.
And you don't often hear me talk about him because that's a waste of time.
Our religion is love and God.
Wow.
That's the religion of the black man.
Let's talk about how our children can discover God.
And this is one of our prophets, Martin Luther King, who I
moral leader in many ways.
All we say to America is be true to what you said on paper. If I lived in China or even Russia or any totalitarian country, maybe I could understand some of these illegal injunctions. Maybe I could understand the denial of certain basic First Amendment privileges because they haven't committed themselves to that over there. But somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest far right. And so just as I say we aren't going to let any dogs or water hoses turn us around, we aren't going to let any injunction turn us around. Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And he's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
Now, the reason why I play this, that was a transitional period, 1968. I had spent a year in Europe, and I had spent also 4 years in the Marine Corps with crackers. So I had a certain animosity against Southerners and crackers. And that's what I call them, that's what they were. And I said last week in '63, when Kennedy was killed, I went to a TV room, and these crackers were raving and clapping about Kennedy getting killed.
Yeah.
And I was like the only black in the room. This is
You were shocked?
I was 22, but this is and I almost had a fit. And they had to hold me back because they knew I was about to jump on this dude. And I never forget how cold these people are. So we got that same kind of condition today. And you saw that with Neely. I mean, these crackers are going crazy. And that's because they're brainwashed to think that they're superior. And a lot of black people are going along with it, not even realize that they're an accomplice.
Well, it goes to, the conditioning of the American psyche, going back to Willie Lynch.
But how do we get back to this morality
part? This is
part?
something that this country has adopted.
But how do we get back to Martin Luther King?
You have a pulpit right here to challenge people in terms of where we put
education, presenting the information so that people can then take the information to their communities.
But
and
I was blessed
share
enough to see it all, and I'm still here.
Absolutely.
Now, the only reason I'm still here is because I have God in my life.
Amen.
So I'm just trying to promote God to black people, because that's your savior. There's nothing else but that. But you have to understand your history, and you have to
understand
yourself.
American history.
Universal history. It's not just America. You know what they did to America? Look what they did to the Indians. Benevolent people, they walked in and took over, killed anything they could see, took all the natural resources. And then they invite the other foreigners that coming in, immigration, and they gave them all.
I dare
I'll
say.
show that one from Martin Graham on this. I'm getting
1967 with NBC. He recorded that at Ebenezer Baptist in Atlanta. He gets into finance. He gets into property.
Pulling
and
yourself
how
up by
white
your
people
bootstrap.
were brought here as welfare recipients
Yeah.
and given everything, and then they turn around and tell us we ought to pick ourselves up by a bootstrap. That's that's a video you should be showing people.
I've got it.
That's the one everybody knows about. I Have a Dream and whatnot. But
I was gonna
that
show
interview
that.
from 1967 at Ebenezer, you can go online. Martin Luther
I've got
King
it
and
here.
NBC.
We don't have time to
1967.
play it today.
You got it?
Yeah, we got
I've got it here.
Okay.
We have to set aside a day to play that.
Other
Educate the children what they're not learning in school.
The other
That's
one I
28
have.
minutes.
I got 9 minutes left.
That's a 28-minute interview.
I'll play that some other time. But what I wanted to play is the conflict between Malcolm and Martin in the 60s. All right? Show that one, number 5. Just run it real quick. We got 9 minutes, and I think this is 3 minutes long.
white man pays Reverend Martin Luther King, subsidizes Reverend Martin Luther King, so that Reverend Martin Luther King can continue to teach the Negroes to be defenseless. That's what you mean by nonviolent. Be defenseless. Be defenseless in the face of one of the most cruel beasts that has ever taken the people into captivity. That's this American white man. And they have proved it throughout the country by the police dogs and the police clubs. 100 years ago, they used to put on a white sheet and use a bloodhound against Negroes. Today, they have taken off the white sheet and put on police uniforms. They've traded in the bloodhounds for police dogs, and they're still doing the same thing. And just as Uncle Tom, back during slavery, used to keep the Negroes from resisting the bloodhound or resisting the Ku Klux Klan by teaching them to love their enemy or pray for those who use them despitefully. Today, Martin Luther King is just a 20th century or modern Uncle Tom or a religious Uncle Tom who is doing the same thing today to keep Negroes defenseless in the face of attack that Uncle Tom did on the plantation to keep those Negroes defenseless in the face of the attack of the Klan in that
Well,
day.
I don't think of love as, in this context, as emotional bosh. I don't think of it as a weak force, but I think of love as something strong and that organizes itself into powerful direct action. This is what I tried to teach in the struggle in the South, that we are not engaged in a struggle that means we sit down and do nothing. That there's a great deal of difference between non-resistance to evil and non-violent resistance. Non-resistance leaves you in a state of stagnant passivity and deadened complacency, whereas non-violent resistance means that you do resist in a very strong and determined manner. And I think some of the criticisms of nonviolence, or some of the critics, fail to realize that we are talking about something very strong, and they confuse non-resistance with nonviolence.
The goal of Dr. Martin Luther King is to give Negroes a chance to sit in a segregated restaurant beside the same white man who had brutalized them for 400 years. The goal of Dr. Martin Luther King is to get Negroes to forgive the people who have brutalized them for 400 years by lulling them to sleep and making them forgetting what those whites have done to them. But the masses of black people in America today don't go for what Martin Luther King is putting down. As you said in one of your articles, it's psychologically insecure, or something of that sort. I forget how you put it. But you didn't endorse what Martin Luther King was doing yourself.
I do not reject his goals of full integration and full equality rights for American citizens. Do you reject these goals?
If you don't think that he's walking on the right road, I'm quite sure you don't agree that he'll get to the right place. And if you would classify his method as psychologically unrealistic, I think that if a man's method is psychologically unrealistic, which means the road or the means or the method that he's using, I think as a psychologist, you would be very doubtful
I don't think
that
that's
he would reach
true.
the right.
If anyone has ever lived with a nonviolent movement in the South, from Montgomery on through the Freedom Rides and through the sit-in movement and the recent Birmingham movement, and see the reactions of many of the extremists and reactionaries in the white community, he wouldn't say that this movement makes, this philosophy makes him comfortable. I think it arouses a sense of shame within him often, in many instances. I think it does something to touch the conscience and establish a sense of guilt. Now, so often people respond to guilt by engaging more in the guilt-evoking act in an attempt to drown the sense of guilt. But this approach certainly doesn't make the white man feel comfortable.
Now, why do I play this? Because, see, this was my tension when I was coming up. I mean, I was 22 in '63, and when Malcolm died, I was 24. So I had been in the service 4 years, so I'd been around in the Far East, so I saw different kind of people. And I was a church guy, so I was with Martin. And I thought integration would work. I thought it would, I was always around integration. I mean, I came up as a kid working for a Jewish family, and they were the best friends a black man could have in the 50s are the Jews, because they were 10 years out of the Holocaust. And that was my, you know, that was my experience. So So I couldn't go with Malcolm because he was saying all white people are devils. And I couldn't hate all white people because I knew too many white people that wouldn't. I had good masters.
What would you say to your
No,
grandchildren
not even
now?
good masters. People who treated me like an equal. And I liked the other people that were dealing with blacks. Now, of course, I was in the North and in New York, so it's completely different up here. But I say all this to say that that's the Willie Lynch of the 60s. And both of our heroes there died at 39. They never got to 40. But look at the accomplishment and the history and the legacy they left behind. So if we just follow these two individuals, then we come out strong. So the church and the ballad of the bullet. That's the theme. Judge a person by the content of the character and the ballad of the bullet. Now I go for that. We got 2 minutes left. Graham, you got a minute.
If I may say, yeah, I remember Reverend Bill Jones from Bethany Baptist in Brooklyn. He was one of Martin's lieutenants. And he said to me one day, he said, "You know, Witherspoon, I never went nowhere without my 38.
Yeah.
I wasn't going down like that. Martin was nonviolent, but I wasn't going down like that."
That's right.
He said, and in Cicero, he said he definitely wasn't closing his eyes in Cicero. He said, because that was worse than anything he had experienced in Martin too. So he said he didn't close his eyes. He had his hand near his pistol. And in the March on Washington, get an expanded photograph of Martin at the March on Washington. You will see a brother in a kufi to Martin's right with a thick mustache. His name was Jesse Dukes. He was one of the men that trained me. He was the detective in the Transit Police Department. He's in that famous photo. But every brother you see in that photograph with a white kufi on is a member of the National Black Police Organization, the NBPO. Those men were there to make sure that nothing happened to Martin. Martin had plenty of guns around him when he was moving. He was nonviolent, but he kept guns around him.
Yeah, 1 minute. I just want to say, I'll show you the actual march. You had a lot of movie stars, Burt Lancaster, Marlon Brando. It was a social thing. And you'd be surprised if you saw the real pictures of that march on Washington '63. I'll entertain you with it next week.
Are you going to be at the
week
march
is
next year?
Christmas.
The march in 85.
Oh.
Well, let's not forget about the march on January 20th.
Ah.
That'll be taking place in Washington,
Well,
D.C.
Ashley was supposed to be on talking about that. The God in me loves the God in you, and stay tuned for more.
Merry Christmas.
Of the Gilchrist Experience.
Happy holidays, brother.
Merry Christmas.